Honey, I just love when we can sit down and talk about stuff, even though we're talking to each other, but I just love our conversations. And today I was thinking about premarital counseling and how important it is for people to get that, couples to get that. What are your thoughts? Because we went through it.
I'm glad you touched on that, love. Premarital is so important, and not only for your first marriage. Some of us unfortunately have first, second and third marriages, regardless of whatever the situation may be. But I think it's so important because we went through it, and it sets boundaries. It sets a tone for the marriage. It sets a tone, whereas if you have a conversation that you're uncomfortable with your partner, you're able to speak to the person who is doing the premarital counsel, which is the mediator. Could be a pastor, could be whoever that you trust in that space to do that premarital counsel. We want to make sure it's a professional, however. But it brings enlightenment to the marriage, and it helps us set the stage as we start the journey. And most time in the premarital session, things come up that we weren't even thinking about, and it gives us an understanding and a space to just jot it down and say, hey, listen, we never thought of this, but this is really, really, really good. So I think it's important from all levels.
I agree. And I think that premarital counseling, in some way, it empowers the couple to really address subject matters that maybe they didn't feel comfortable to address amongst themselves, because there's a way that the counselors just seem to pull information out of you. They make you think about important aspects of your marriage. Of your marriage to be. We know there's the financial aspect. We know there's the sexual aspect. We know there's the communication aspect. But there are a lot of other different aspects of a marriage relationship that it's important to get the premarital, because it helps you to think about it. And some people are really uncomfortable initiating a conversation, but when you have a skilled counselor, someone especially sensitive, in tune with the Holy Spirit, led by the Holy Spirit to kind of segue into conversations for you, it just makes it so much more easier. And I also feel that premarital counseling helps the woman and the man to know whether or not this is in fact the right person that you're about to marry. What do you think about that?
Wow, good segue, love. Yeah. I get that, because you say you want to be married, but when you go into the counseling, that's where all the baggage comes up. Yeah. That's where all the things comes to the forefront. And especially if you have a counselor who is really knowledgeable and experienced, he or she know how to draw, like you said, draw that information out. And because sometimes you think you're ready, and then as you're doing the counseling, you're saying to yourself, you know what, I'm not ready. Right, I'm not ready. That doesn't mean that you don't want to marry that person. It's just that the timing of it is not right, and you need more time to figure out what is going on, or whatever causing the tension, or whatever it is. So with the premarital, it gives you an opportunity to say, you know what, I could take some time and figure this out first before I enter into a marriage covenant.
That's right. And I think that's a very valid point, that not only does it help you to know whether or not that person is right for you, but to know whether or not the timing of it is right. And so that's a great point. When we did premarital counseling, and I think you were more accustomed to the whole idea of counseling than I was, because it was my first time doing premarital counseling, and it felt a little bit intrusive, if I can use that word, but the first session or two felt a little uncomfortable for me. And I think that it felt that way because I'm a more private person. And I know we're all very different. Some people are so open, they will tell everything to a complete stranger, and they won't feel any ways about it. But for people that are kind of more private, or you have to really, some people use the term secretive. I don't like that term. I prefer the term private. What about people like those? How do you convince them, so to speak, that premarital counseling is the right thing to do?
Great question. For me, I believe that when you're doing premarital counseling, especially with someone who is uncomfortable of speaking on any subject as far as premarital is concerned, speak to that person individually. it's important to get an assessment of that person individually and hush those things out. It's something to be said about doing individual counseling with a couple, that they both have a separate individual counseling, because it gives you a chance to ask questions, and the question that you're asking is to find out and get information that you need to help both parties. Oftentimes those questions doesn't come up in the couple together. Again, we touched on it earlier in this segment. Uncomfortable, somebody feel uncomfortable when you have that alone time with the counselor, that you're able to discuss all the things that you're uncomfortable with, and the things that the counselor would draw out of you. So that would allow the counselor with more information how to proceed when both couples come together for premarital.
It does make it a little easier, doesn't it? Because it's easy to be one-on-one like what we're doing now, and just being able to talk. And I think sometimes that one-on-one, say the female with a female counselor and the male with a male, as a premarital counselor,
Correct.
feels very inviting. It feels more comfortable. And certainly if the counselor is skilled, he or she can help the individuals to be more comfortable about what they're about to get together as a unit, as an engaged couple. What do you think about timing? Because everyone thinks differently about the amount of time that they want to be engaged. You know, some people think 6 months is a good time for engagement, 3 months is a good time, a year is a good time. So considering the different time frames, what do you think, what would you recommend as being a good time for people to start premarital counseling?
Personally, I think premarital counseling should start right as soon as both parties are very serious. It's a bit early, but it's necessary, because again, those are the time and the information that you need right up front. You don't want to get too deep into it and then you decide that you guys don't like each other, because it happens. I've seen it happen over and over again. So initially, when you guys are finally getting serious and say, hey, listen, I'm taking this relationship further. I think immediately as both parties recognize, it's the same time that the parties started premarital counseling.
That sounds like a great recommendation. And I know that individuals coming together and getting the premarital counseling, it can help as early as possible. It can help them really to address the things that need to be addressed, and it gives them time to work on it, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
So if a couple is planning a wedding that is, say, a year out, and they start premarital as soon as they know that they're serious, and that, you know, it could be maybe he hasn't given her the ring yet. We recommend that the proposal takes place at least before the premarital starts, but it could start as early as the 12 months out from when their marriage is going to occur. And I would go as far as to say that couples can get premarital not only from one set of counselors, but they can get premarital counseling as often as they need to, because here's why I say that. Because you may go to a man or a woman that's doing premarital with both of you, and you're going to gather and you're going to learn and you're going to go through the process and you're going to grow. But if you have someone else that you can go to as well that can provide premarital for both of you, it kind of gives a different lens and a different perspective. Not that you're not looking for anything so vastly different, but it does bring kind of like a reinforcement, if you will, to the process, and helps you to be better prepared. So that's something that people can think about too, not only to do premarital counseling once, but do it twice. You can do it twice with the same counselor, but you certainly could consider twice with two different people.
I agree. I agree that it can't hurt. The more counseling that you get is the more prepared you are in the relationship or in the marriage, because the lens in which that you're gaining understanding as you have both, sessions of different people, is just more knowledge, and knowledge is key. The more education that you have, it's key, because you're better developed and better able, suited in the relationship when the hard times hit.
And I think that one of the things that premarital counseling does too, it helps each individual to learn themselves and know themselves better, and to work on whatever weaknesses there may be and also identify whatever strengths are already there. So it's a win-win. When people get premarital counseling, it is definitely a win-win. They cannot lose. There are a lot of things that are spoken of and addressed in premarital counseling, like we went through premarital counseling. So what were some of your favorite topics, if I can ask that, if any, that we talked about in premarital counseling?
Yeah, when our pastor did premarital counseling with us, the highlight for me was the sexual part of it. And I'm laughing, but it's serious, because in a marriage, you want to know the dynamics of how the intimacy, how often, how frequent, you know what it's like, what you want, what are you looking for, because it takes away from the marriage when you get into that relationship and you find that your expectations are not met. But if you talk about that in premarital, at least it gives an understanding of both parties, where to go, how to flow from that dynamic. So that was the highlight for me. And our pastors did an awesome job of really highlighting it and really made it relevant, and even our pastor did mention to us that we have to have a schedule, and I looked like a schedule.
Schedule sex, right?
Yeah, schedule time for sex, for intercourse, and I'm like, schedule? But again, I didn't understand it until we get into the marriage and understand what he was talking about. He wasn't necessarily saying schedule as the word scheduling, but more of making it a priority.
Yes.
Because we get so bogged down when we get into the marriage with so many things, the children, the home, the businesses, and just events, and just so many things that consume a lot of your time, that sometimes go to the wayside. So scheduling it it gives you a more open and an opportunity to embrace it, because this is where it's going to go down, and this is what it's going to take.
And it figures that would be the highlight for you, and it was the low light for me. I just made up a term because it just felt like some of the questions that we were being asked and that I was being asked, I was like, whoa, put the brakes on, It just felt like I was being undressed with the words from the counselor. And it definitely felt uncomfortable, but I definitely see why it's very important to address something so personal between two people, because you cannot go into a relationship not understanding what the expectations are and what the needs are for each other. Those are the things that can tear a marriage apart from the very start. And so that was great. I love the expectation part of it, talking about that. I would say that was the highlight for me. That was the low light for you. But just to be able to put on the table, like, here's what I expect. And it's not giving expectations as if you expect that the person won't fail sometimes, or will always be able to meet those expectations, or will be perfect at it. But it's just a way of putting out those things. And certainly my expectations were not materialistic at all. They were just simple things like, faithfulness, loyalty, devotion, loving me. What was interesting that came up in our premarital counseling was, and I said it, and we say things all the time, and I don't think we realize what we're saying. I remember that I had written, one of mine was that I wanted you to love me unconditionally, and I remember Pastor looked at me and said, really? Do you think that that's possible? And he dispelled that right away. After I thought about it, it made sense. Like, how is it possible for you to love me unconditionally? Only God can love us unconditionally. But I've said it, I hear people saying it, and it's just not humanly possible. You can love me with all that you have. You can love me with all that's within you. But for me to put an expectation on you to love me unconditionally, that's like asking for you to be God in some way, and that just can't happen. So it was fun. It really was fun. It opened up so many different conversations for us, and every time we drove home from our sessions, we continued the conversations
Yeah.
like, and you were always famous for asking, so what did you gain from it tonight? What did you learn tonight? Why? Because you wanted me to be able to articulate
Yeah.
what it was, and then we would end up talking about it. Was there anything that you felt like you didn't need to talk about in counseling, or maybe it was like a low point for you?
I thought it was relevant because I went into the premarital counseling with the seriousness in which that it should be taken. So going into it, I was just like a sponge, soaking up everything that I need, everything that the counselor said, our pastor said, because I wanted to be a good husband. I wanted to make sure that going into this marriage, I'm going to be my best self.
Yes.
And my best self encompasses me to listen to other people who have paved the way before me, other people who have lived and married for 27, 25, 20, 30 years of marriage. So they have gone through the storm. So I think for me, and the reason why I took it so seriously, because I understand the importance of gaining all that information to be a better husband, to be a better grandfather, just to be
All
better
around.
all around.
Yes. I think I would just wrap up our conversation by saying, premarital counseling, it has done so much. It has, for me personally, it has changed my perspective. Not just about premarital counseling, but about counseling in general, and the need for it and the importance for it. Because sometimes you can get counseling not because something's wrong, but because you want to grow in a certain area. So that's another way to look at it too. And with premarital counseling, my recommendation is that people make sure they're getting counseling from people who are, let me not use the word successfully because I was going to, but they need to get premarital counseling from people who have themselves done the work and are married and are experiencing a marriage that is a reflection of what God would want from a marriage.
I agree. Well said, love. And for me, it embodies the relationship and the covenant that we stored in our marriage. So with that said, anything that we could glean from that's going to help us. And you mentioned someone who's seasoned. I like to call them seasoned.
Seasoned, yes.
A seasoned person, because seasoned, and I'm going to use this metaphor, when you season the meat, it takes a while for the season to get into that meat. Just so the same thing for a marriage. So with seasoned people in your lives teaching you, allow you to understand you're going to go through the peaks, the valleys, the highs and the lows, but through it all, you become successful in doing it together.
Praise the Lord. Well, this is J.J. White Ministries. I am Dr. Judy and my husband, Elder Joe, and we are so glad that you've tuned in. And we hope that something that we have said has encouraged you to get premarital counseling. And furthermore, we look forward to you reaching out to us because that is something that we offer, and we very much want to help you and be a part of your journey. Thank you for listening in.